Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hart Bennett, and I'm going to read to you Chapter 3B today from my book, Seven Sisters, The Voyage. President Bramwell called a meeting the next morning for anyone who was well enough to help with the sick. Eleanor and President Tippett were still the only two from their ward able to get out of bed. There were about 20 other people in attendance from the various wards. President Bramwell had to sit down because he was too unsteady to stand. I've called this meeting because you people are the handful of saints in each of the 15 wards who have been able to get used to the ship's movements. I envy you greatly because I haven't fully gotten my own sea legs yet. This unique phenomenon also makes you the ones who are called on to care for the sick in your wards. Please remember the words of the Savior when he said, "Inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me." I promise you, brothers and sisters, that if you will care for the sick on this voyage, God will bless you and your family in multiple ways and give you the needed strength and courage for your entire journey. A sister raised her hand. "We have several in our ward who need to be administered to." Eleanor spoke next. "Yes, Sister Devereaux is not only seasick, but her heart is failing and she's getting very weak." "Can't we count on the doctor?" asked a brother. "The captain has him in lockup until he sobers up," Bramwell said. "He gave me the doctor's medical book, hoping we can use it for our own resources." Then, holding it up, he added, "I'll put Sister Wise in charge of it." Eleanor moved forward to receive the large volume. She felt honored to be trusted with the book and was anxious to scan its contents. After receiving their instructions, the caretakers dispersed to their wards to help wherever they could. There, the elders, who were well enough, administered to the saints in the worst condition. Presidents Bramwell and Tippett administered to Esther Devereaux, who coughed steadily during the blessing. She smiled faintly at the end, closed her eyes, and calmly fell asleep. Eleanor moved from one sick patient to another, helping with wet rags and administering teaspoons of medicine from small bottles obtained from the infirmary. She helped mothers with their babies, brought pails to those calling for them, and tried to clean up the worst messes. Eleanor found that the harder she worked, the less sick she felt. She paid a lot of attention to her sisters, helping them with their requests. As she held Caroline's head, she encouraged her with a cup of water. "Drink all you can, Caroline. You don't want to get delirium." "You're a saint, Eleanor," Caroline whispered. "You'd do the same for me if I were sick and you were well." "How are the others doing?" asked Caroline. "Well, you might say I have six sisters," said Eleanor, chuckling because of her unintended tongue twister. "Oh, don't make me cry," Caroline said, holding her stomach. Eleanor continued with her series of S words on a sleek sailing ship at sea. Caroline couldn't help it now and finally burst out laughing, which turned into coughing, then retching. Eleanor was sorry she had provoked another mess to clean up. Eleanor checked on Sister Devereaux every half hour. She didn't know what to do for a failing heart, but studied the doctor's book when she had a spare moment. Many times she stayed with Esther and tried to comfort her. Esther's husband wasn't any help because of his own seasickness. Eleanor often found herself conferring with President Tippett and felt that they were becoming a good medical team. That afternoon, they retreated to the galley to make some gruel in hopes it would give the suffering saints some nourishment and strength. "Have you ever made gruel before?" questioned Tippett as they stood by the stove. "No, but I've seen my Aunt Lucy make it, with what looks like a lot of water and not very much oatmeal." Eleanor poured water into the pot while Tippett stoked the fire. Then she poured the oatmeal into the boiling water while he stirred. "You seem to have a knack for healing, Sister Wise. My aunt got me a job as a chore girl at the East Gate Sanatorium 4 years ago. I learned a lot of things, by just keeping my eyes open. I'd like to become a registered midwife like she is." "And how is it that you know so much about the human body, President?" Tippett paused for a moment, then answered, "My father was an undertaker." Eleanor couldn't help but laugh a little. Tippett joined her. It was a light moment, and there had been plenty few of those lately. President Tippett lifted the pot off the stove and made his way back to the sleeping quarters, followed by Eleanor, who carried some wooden bowls. She placed them on the long table down the center of the 'tween deck and dished up the thin gruel. "Anybody feel like some gruel?" she said cheerfully as she could. The moaning and retching multiplied tenfold in the next few seconds. "It must be too soon," President Tippett said to Eleanor as he lifted up the pot. "I'll see if one of the other wards would like some." That evening, President Bramwell called another meeting of the caregivers. They all assembled on deck, grateful to have a reprieve from working below. "Are things improving any, brothers and sisters?" he asked hopefully. "President, the smell in our quarters is repulsive, and we're suffocating for air," said Brother Pinkerton of the 15th Ward. "No one has strength enough to clean anything." Everyone agreed. After a pause, President Bramwell continued, "Brothers and sisters, I think it's time we changed our tactics. We've been praying about it, and I've been praying about it, and here's what I've been prompted to do. First thing tomorrow morning, we need to get all the sick ones up on deck for some fresh air. That will cure them faster than anything else, especially if they keep their eyes on the horizon instead of on the bobbing ship. Then we can clean the sleeping quarters." It was a wonderful idea. Why hadn't they thought of it before? The caregivers dispersed, talking about the healing power of the fresh ocean air would have on the passengers. But instead of going downstairs, President Tippett slipped away from the others and made his way to the bulwark. After staring up at the evening stars for a few moments, he bent over the rail and put his head in his hands. Looking around for her helper, Eleanor spied Tippett at the rail and approached him. She tentatively touched his arm. "Are you feeling ill, President?" President Tippett tried to hide his emotions as he wiped away a few tears. "No, I just need a moment to compose myself." "This has been a challenging day," comforted Eleanor. Tippett didn't reply. "Are you all right?" Eleanor said. Breathing a heavy sigh, he answered, "I'm just dreaming of home and wondering how my wife and children are doing without me." Eleanor had never thought about President Tippett's having a family. Now she was curious. "How many children do you have?" "5, with the youngest being almost 2 years old," he said, smiling. "I left for my mission to Scotland when John Harvey was only a month old." "You've been away from your family for 2 years?" she asked in disbelief. "Yes, and before that, I marched with the Mormon Battalion for 3,900 miles on foot." Eleanor was stunned to learn this. "How can you be away for so long from all you hold dear?" "I couldn't if I didn't know the Lord had restored his true gospel to the earth. No, I most certainly could not. I'd be home taking care of my loved ones and working to make the home Abby and I both crave. It will be many more months before I can put my arms around her and my children," he said, starting to tear up again. "I admire your devotion, President." Straightening up to his full height, President Tippett felt better for having shared his feelings with Eleanor. "Well, Sister Wise, are you ready to take a deep breath and go back downstairs?" "I'm ready if you are," said Eleanor. The next morning, President Tippett and Eleanor walked to the center of the room and surveyed the saints under their charge. "Brothers and sisters," announced Tippett, "today is a beautiful day, and not a day to stay in bed and be sick. You've all had 3 days to feel sorry for yourselves, and today everyone will be going up on deck." Disbelief swept the room in the form of groans and moans. Next, it was Eleanor's turn. "The captain said there are some porpoises on the bow wave, leading the ship. I'm sure none of you would want to miss seeing them." Suddenly forgetting her sickness, Fanny looked up at Susanna. "Can I go up and see the porpoises?" "I want to go too," Phoebe said with interest. Tippett continued giving directions. "You will all need to take your mattresses and bedding up on deck to air out." The berths seemed to dislodge their guests all at once, and the saints weakly pulled off their mattresses. The thought of moving up on deck was starting to appeal to them. Some of the older saints had to be carried up the stairs, including Sister Devereaux. When President Tippett set her gently on the deck, she said with a feeble but grateful smile, "Thank you, President. It is such a blessing to breathe the fresh ocean air and see God's marvelous creations once again." Soon her family joined her, including her 5-year-old grandson, Brigham. The moment his mother put him down on the deck, he hopped around on one foot and then the other. This kept everyone around them amused. Soon the deck was strewn with saints who were lying in the sun. A few of the children and adolescents leaned over the bulwark to look at the porpoises. Look at the porpoises are faster than the ship, Matthew laughed. Susanna, Caroline, and Lizzie started to feel better with each passing moment as they stood and supported each other. Soon Eleanor came up the hatchway and walked over to them with a smile on her face. Sisters, this is a turning point. You've made it past the hard part. Then it dawned on Eleanor that someone was missing. Where is Lavinia? She said, looking around the deck. She said she's not coming up, said Caroline. She claims she's too sick. Is that right? Said Eleanor as she turned and headed toward the hatchway. When Eleanor arrived at the 'tween deck, she noticed only one family there. Matilda Jobson was changing her baby, and her husband, Jesse, was helping put shoes on their 3-year-old. All the berths were empty except that one was squirming. All the berths were empty except that one had squirming covers. Eleanor moved to within 6 feet of the berth, planted her feet solidly apart, put her hands on her hips, and in a firm voice commanded, Lavinia, get up. The body jerked to attention, but stayed covered. I can't, she wailed. Yes, you can. Get up or I'll pull your ears. The covers crept down from over her head, and she peeked out groggily. You'll pull my ears? What do you mean? I mean just that. If you don't get up, I'll pull your ears and take this shoe to you, she said, grabbing a handy shoe and moving closer. Lavinia was agitated as she sat up and drew the covers to her chin. Stay away from me, you saucebox, she cried. I will not, Eleanor said as she grabbed Lavinia's bed covers and started to pull Lavinia back with all her might. Let me read that again. I will not, Eleanor said as she grabbed Lavinia's bed covers and started to pull. Lavinia screamed and pulled back with all her might. The two strained against each other. No one was getting the advantage. Finally, Lavinia let go completely, and Eleanor flew backward and fell to the deck. Lavinia grabbed a hairbrush from the carpet bag she had at the end of her berth and let it fly. Eleanor dodged. Lavinia also had her tableware in her bag and began throwing it, first a tin cup, then a plate. Eleanor dodged again and again. You're going up on deck one way or another, Lavinia, she said as she moved toward her. Lavinia scrambled down from her berth and grabbed a mop standing in the corner. She started chasing Eleanor around the table. Then, feeling rather odd for some reason, Lavinia looked down at her nightdress and discovered it was very embarrassingly arranged. Gasping in mortification, she grabbed it together at the gaping neck and started back towards her berth. Eleanor wasn't about to give up as she chased Lavinia around the other end of the table. Don't you dare get back in your berth. If you do, I'll pull you out by your heels. By this time, Brother and Sister Jobson were in fits of laughter. They didn't know what to make of this dramatic scene being played out before them. After a bit more chasing and dodging, Eleanor stopped and took a stance. Lavinia, you're up now. You might as well get dressed and go up on deck. Lavinia looked astonished. Then she realized she had been had. I see what you've done, she said. You've tricked me into getting up. All right. I'll come up on deck for a little while. Eleanor felt triumphant. Then her smile faded as she put her hands back on her hips and turned slowly and looked sternly at the Jobsons. Brother Jobson felt the imaginary anger and played along. We're going, Sister Wise. We're going, he said, scooting his laughing wife and children up the stairs. After about an hour on deck, everyone looked and felt much better, and soon began to move around and chat amiably with their neighbors. Their appetites also returned. Several mothers made their way to the galley to boil water and make something bland for their family to eat. Most of the morning was spent on deck, but as the afternoon wore on, many of the adults retreated to their sleeping quarters to assess the horrible task of cleanup. The well children stayed on deck and ran around or played games with each other, while the young people sat or stood in groups and talked and laughed about how awful they had felt during their spell of seasickness. By evening, the saints were mostly recovered, and on Matthew's trumpet signal, they all came together for a full company prayer meeting on deck after a cautiously eaten dinner. President Bramwell was feeling much better, too, as he stepped to the captain's deck to address the saints. Brothers and sisters, I am so grateful to be looking into the faces of well saints. I never did like the color of green for a skin tone, he said as they all chuckled. You don't know how good it is to hear you laughing instead of moaning. And they all agreed by laughing some more. You'll need to get a good night's rest tonight because tomorrow morning I want each ward to go to work cleaning everything in your area and to wash all your soiled clothes and bedding. There's a lot of seawater which you can use for laundering and bathing, he said, spreading his arms wide apart to indicate the ocean on either side of the ship, and several empty barrels from the storage room. Put the two together and you have makeshift wash tubs and bathtubs. Finishing with his instructions, he concluded the meeting. Brother Careless, let us praise God from whom all blessings flow, and then President Palmer will give the benediction this evening. The crew had very much enjoyed the last 3 days of freedom when they could move about the ship, do their work, sing their shanties, and talk most foul. They loved that the passengers were sick in their berths. They could say and do as they pleased without having to worry about whether they were adhering to some foolish contract signed by the Black Ball Line and a bunch of sanctimonious Mormons. Now the saints were underfoot again, and the crew would have to readapt to the hundreds of people wandering like sheep all over the deck. But adapting wasn't in Titus's nature. He didn't like it, and he wasn't going to pretend he did. His swarthy countenance seemed to grow even darker, and the saints knew to keep out of his way. That morning the ship became a beehive of activity as the saints went to work on their sleeping quarters. The men scraped and scrubbed the floors, while the women washed the clothes and took them up on deck to drape over anything they could find that would allow them to dry. There was plenty of squealing as the older children scrubbed the younger children in half-full barrels of cold water, and lots of crying when soap got into their eyes. The sounds were actually refreshing, and nobody seemed to mind as they each performed their given tasks. Caroline's assignment, however, was to wash her sister's night clothes, and she didn't have the foggiest notion how to go about it. She stood looking at the barrel of water, and then at the stack of soiled clothes on the floor. She couldn't fathom what must take place. Lizzie was scouring berths and happening to glance over to see Caroline standing in wonder. She realized her sister would need a lesson in the finer points of laundering. Caroline, there are 5 steps to washing anything, said Lizzie as she got down and handed Caroline a nightdress from the top of the pile. First, you get it wet. Caroline took the nightdress and plunged it into the water, which got her sleeves wet. Oh, she exclaimed. I see, this is going to get messy. She stopped and rolled up her sleeves. She was determined to go on. Susanna, who was nearby, stepped closer to see the fun. Next, you rub soap all over it, directed Lizzie, handing Caroline a large square of soap. Caroline clumsily rubbed the soap a few times on the dress and then picked up her momentum. Unexpectedly, the soap squirted out of her too small hand and slid across the deck. Susanna muffled a laugh as Caroline ran to retrieve it. Slippery little troll, she declared. Then you push the dress up and down on this washboard a few times, said Lizzie, handing Caroline the board. The washboard seemed a strange and awkward thing to Caroline as she placed it down in the water and put the nightdress on it. With determination, she forcefully pushed the nightdress down the washtub, but on the way down, the water splashed in her face and on her chest. She gasped but continued, drenching herself with each retraction. Lizzie and Susanna turned their backs to stifle their laughter. Caroline was oblivious to them because she was so focused on the chore at hand. Turning back, Lizzie indicated another barrel. Then you put the nightdress in this clean water to get the suds out. Caroline took the nightdress out of the water and transferred it to the other barrel. She failed, however, to wring it out first, and it dripped water all over the top of her skirt. Unconcerned, she plunged it down and back up a few times. Now you wring it out, said Lizzie. Caroline gathered it up in a wad and tried to squeeze it. Again, the water dripped down her front, making her entirely wet from head to toe. Here, let me show you an easier way, said Lizzie as she took the nightdress, elongated it, folded it in half, and then held it over the barrel, twisting it until all the water came out. She didn't get one bit wet. Caroline was amazed. So this is how clothes get clean. When I used to get a spot on my frock back home, I'd just hang it in my wardrobe, and the next morning when I got up, it was magically clean. I always wondered how that happened. With the lesson complete, Caroline tackled the rest of the pile of clothing and was soon washing each piece like an expert laundrywoman, albeit a wet one. Lizzie happily returned to her tasks, and Susanna began brushing the twins' hair and rebraiding their braids. Lavinia made beds with clean bedding, and Eleanor helped a mother bathe her 18-month-old baby in a wooden bucket. The men sprinkled lime under the berths, and the pungent smell gradually replaced the suffocating one that had been so stifling to the sisters while they were sick. It was a welcome change. Topside, the women draped their washing over railings, barrels, and ledges. There were several lines across the deck to hold nappies and other clothing. Lizzie finally finished scouring her sisters' berths and decided to help Caroline by taking a bucket of wet clothes to the top deck. When she emerged from the hatchway, she looked for a clothes-free spot and noticed one a ways away from the others, near a crewman who was working with his back to her. She set the bucket on the deck, took out a piece of washing, shook it with a snap, and placed it over the bulwark nearby, smoothing it with her hands. The sailor turned around at the snap and was pleased to recognize Lizzie. "Morning to you, my lady," smiled Alfie. "Good morning, mate," she said hesitantly. Taking advantage of the chance encounter, he inquired, "How was my dance partner this morning?" Lizzie blushed, remembering the wedding dance a few days ago. "Just ducky," she replied. "Ready to kick up your heels again?" Lizzie could see he was trifling with her, so she appeared indifferent. "Not with the likes of you," she said with a little smile. "We cut some fancy jigs together," he flattered. "You move like a sail in a gale." Lizzie was amused, but pretended to be indignant. "President Bramwell might not like your tone with the ladies." Still working on her, he mused. "He might not like it, but what about you?" Lizzie smiled wryly, realizing she had a devilishly handsome sailor paying attention to her. "I'm not opposed to make a new acquaintance," she said coyly. Lizzie and Alfie continued to talk and laugh while she hung out the remainder of her washing. She kept a sharp watch to make sure none of the presidency saw her fraternizing with a crew member. She didn't want to get into trouble. Then, bidding farewell until the next time, she took her bucket and started below, stealing glances at Alfie as she went. "Looks like it's been snowing clothes," said Griswold to Jabez and Titus as they climbed the ratlines. "I've never seen such a washing bunch of immigrants." "I've been across with Irishmen and Germans," Jabez added, "and they never washed like this. The unadulterated smell of tightly packed, unwashed humanity is putrid." Titus got a strange look in his eye. "You know, I might not be astonished if some of this wash finds its way into the ocean. We get some pretty stiff breezes sometimes." Griswold and Jabez roared loudly. They knew exactly what Titus was saying. By the late afternoon, the saints had stopped bringing wet laundry up the hatchway and were now below preparing and eating their evening meals. The galley was busy with lines of saints waiting for their turns around the large galley stove. Some saints were eating cold rations because they didn't want to take the time to wait for their water to boil. The long tables down the center of the tween decks were filled with saints eating and interacting with their families and other ward members. Above, the sailors moved around the deck, doing their work, and if they came upon clothes that were in their way, they just tossed them over the side of the ship, without remorse and with a spiteful laugh. Eleanor hadn't stopped for dinner yet, having one more bucket of water to dump, so she made her way up the stairs. When she came out of the hatchway, she was horrified to see Griswold nonchalantly toss a quilt over the side of the ship, and Titus casually cut a clothesline, allowing a dozen wet items to fall to the deck. Eleanor immediately put her bucket down, rushed over to where Titus was standing, and spoke loudly and forcefully. "Sir, I believe President Bramwell has made arrangements with the captain for our washing to be done 2 times a week, with the clothing hung up on the deck. It is imperative that this be done. It is a health issue. With all the seasickness we've had, clothes and bedding have been saturated with vomit, and we have dozens of infants in napkins. If you don't keep the passengers and their surroundings clean in this voyage, there will be disease and sickness you can't even imagine. It will claim many lives, and that includes the crew. Now, please instruct your mates that they are not to throw our wash into the ocean, or I'll go straight to the captain." Titus was taken aback by this strong young woman, but he didn't show signs of being intimidated. He paused for a moment and measured what he would say. Then, with just as much force as she had delivered to him, he said, "You Mormons need to tend to your washing a little closer. These clothes have been dry for over an hour. They need to be taken down and out of our way. We have a ship to sail." Eleanor was suddenly mortified that those in charge of hanging out the wash had been so derelict about checking the dryness of the clothing which had laid out for over 2 hours. "I'll take care of it," she said, a bit flustered. Then, gaining back her resolve, she let him have it again. "I'll be back in 1 minute, and there had better not be anything else that disappears before I do." She tromped down the nearest hatchway. Titus turned to Griswold. "There's a little spit and vinegar in that wench." "I think you've got her pegged," Griswold said with a laugh. Not many more seconds passed before the clatter of footsteps was heard on the stairs, and 24 sisters came streaming out of the hatchways. They scurried about the deck, picking up their washing in less than half a minute, and back down the hatchways they went. Jabez surveyed the empty deck with wonder. "Looks like the snow's melting, Titus." Titus clicked his teeth. "Aye, things are definitely heating up around here." That's the end of chapter 3. Over and out.